Hi, everyone. I'm Pratna from the Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development. And welcome to this panel on the cost of Asia's digital transformation and pathways for stronger accountability and rights-based approaches. So we have an incredible panel with us here today, some online, some offline. And we're really grateful that everyone has been able to join us. This session was conceptualized with the understanding that I think digital is now such a huge part of our lives. It's something that we can no longer ignore. And it's become a buzzword, digital transformation, whether it's in energy, technology, education, health, media and entertainment, the financial sector. Digital transformation is something that all governments and all stakeholders are talking about these days. So we thought it would be a missed opportunity to not have a panel dedicated to unpacking what digital transformation means in the context of Asia specifically. And that's something that we will be discussing through a panel discussion and then, of course, a Q&A at the end of the panel. Just to flag a few housekeeping rules. So this is a live-streamed panel, and we have participants joining online as well who will be posting their questions. So to all of those online, please don't hesitate to add your questions to the Zoom question and answer box as well. This is also a space where there are going to be issues that are potentially sensitive that are being discussed. But as you know, we can't control the flow of who comes into the room and who doesn't. So I'll also request all the panelists as well as the participants to use your discretion in terms of safety, security, and risk, in terms of what you're willing to share and what you think is safe to share, because we don't have complete control over who is in the room. So I just wanted to flag that as well. We will try and keep the panelists to speak about 5 to 7 minutes each. And please don't be offended if I interrupt you for going over time. I'll try and be discreet and not use this gavel as a sign that your time is up. So for those joining online as well, Sirat, Santosh, and Dulanjaya, please don't get offended if I interrupt you. This is just in the interest of having time for the audience interaction as well. And then, without further ado, I'll introduce all our panelists briefly and then hand it over to them. So we have, an incredible panel today with experts on digital rights from Nepal, from Pakistan, from Sri Lanka, and then we also have the more regional and international perspective on what the digital transformation agenda is and what it means for different sectors. So we have Santosh, Sirat, Dulanjaya, Lorenzo, and Kyle. And I'll be posing a few questions to the panel and then give it to them to take the floor and respond to those questions. So maybe just to begin with, we can start with the country-specific examples and then move on to a more macro perspective on what the digital transformation means. So maybe first, I will pass it on to Santosh. So Santosh Sigdel is the co-founder and executive director of Digital Rights Nepal. And I think it's something that we can't ignore, what has happened in Nepal over the past 1 week. And I think one of the impetus for the protest was also the banning of social media. So this also comes at the right time to discuss what the digital agenda means in the context of Nepal. So Santosh, handing it over to you. As Asia's digital transformation agenda takes center stage in many government policies, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in the context of Nepal, and how can platform accountability help in addressing some of these challenges to make sure that this transformation is embedded in human rights and environmental rights protections? So Santosh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pratna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I audible? Okay. So glad to be here. This is in this turbulent time, and currently I'm based in Kathmandu. So talking about the digital transformation agenda, the Asian agenda of digital transformation, and how Nepal is doing on this. Digital transformation has remained one of the major agenda in Nepal since last few years or since last 1 decade. However, it has been accelerated in current recent times. Nepal declared 2024-34 as IT decade, and there has been a number of policy initiatives to accelerate the process. Recently, the Nepal government adopted AI's National Artificial Intelligence Policy. Before that, we have Digital Nepal Framework. And last year, the process of revitalizing the Digital Nepal Framework has been started. So there is Digital Nepal Framework 2.0 is in the making. Similarly, there is e-governance blueprint is in the process. The government has formed e-governance board, and there has been some processes ongoing to redesign the digital space as well. There was ongoing process of social media bill, and I'll talk about that later. And information technology and cybersecurity bill was also in the parliament when in the last session of the parliament. So these are the some of the initiative taken by the Nepal for the digital transformation, and there has been some partnership with the multinational development banks as well. The ADB has prioritized digital transformation as one of the agenda. World Bank has also invested. So there are ongoing projects of World Bank and ADB as well. So there are, one is policy processes, another is programs and interventions such as national ID card and digital e-governance, different e-governance initiatives. So that is there. However, despite this intervention and despite this initiative, there are a number of challenges that we have faced, and few just erupted to full force, as we have seen in the last month. So one of the major issues or challenges that we have seen is the kind of governance and sustainability of governance and coordination between the different agencies. And some of the policies are working in silos. There is no coordination between different policies. For example, we are talking about the national ID card, but there is no privacy and data protection, comprehensive data protection law. So without having the base of data protection law, we have started this national ID card system. Similarly, another challenge is infrastructure. The mobile penetration has reached to the optimum point, 100% saturation, but that is more focused in the urban area with multiple users having multiple access in the urban areas. But there is, if we look at from the perspective of gender or who has the ownership of this penetration or quality of services, or that is problematic. So that is another challenge in terms in the process of digital transformation. Third is about the trust and about the digital rights that we have seen. So the government is more kind of regulating these spaces without considering without ensuring the corresponding digital rights. For example, privacy, data protection, these issues have been kind of sidelined. And while having these policies, they are prioritizing development or access or control, but not having the discussion with the stakeholder or civil society or rights group and ensuring rights. So while they developed the data protection, while developing the social media bill, there was a voice from the civil society that process was kind of unilateral. Civil society and all the stakeholders were not consulted in the process. They have many grievances or many issues that has to be addressed, but that the government did not pay attention to that. However, they unilaterally in 2023, TikTok was banned. After that, Telegram was banned in Nepal. So without creating a trust or trust environment, or without having this ensuring digital rights, more of the regulatory approach, restrictive approach was in process. So, and that was a kind of reaction to, that was also one of the reasons that the Gen Z protest that happened last week in Nepal, that was one of the reasons. So in terms of platform also, and now talking about the issues of how platform accountability
I think
can be one of the ways we ensure platform accountability. From the example we have seen in the last week, the platform accountability is in a very fragile state in Nepal, where both the government and the platforms, they were not able to address the some of the issues created by the platform. So offensive content or provocative content, hate speech, doxing were on the rise during last. We saw that they were on rise, and platforms were also failed to ensure their community guidelines, removing those objectionable or purely problematic content. So while talking about the role of MDBs also, while investing money or infrastructure, working with the government, they have also failed to coordinate or work with the civil society, and they have failed to ensure the free prior consent of the stakeholder they are working with. So that's why some of the development program related with ICT transformation, they have also caused social issues like landlessness, and other infrastructure issues. The kind of relation between the community and the development project has been in problem because of the lack of collaboration or dialogue with the local communities. So that has to be also considered for the right-based digital transformation, in my opinion. Thank you, Pratana.
Thank you very much, Santosh, and thank you also for sticking to the time. I think you've highlighted many issues that, despite there might be like e-governance blueprints and digital frameworks and different infrastructure goals and aspirations, but if the foundation of community consultation, FPIC, isn't respected, all of that falls apart, because then the foundation of that isn't sound enough to build upon for creating human rights frameworks in the digital agenda. So thank you for highlighting the perspective of Nepal. I will pass it on to Seerat Khan next, who's the research and grants lead at Digital Rights Foundation, Pakistan. Seerat, from your work and the context of Pakistan, what do you see as some of the challenges in terms of implementing the digital rights, the digital transformation agenda in Pakistan? And if you could also talk about some of the gendered issues that you're seeing in the work that you do, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prarthana. And I will be basically reiterating what Santosh from Digital Rights Nepal have said, because Pakistan's rapid digital transformation has been very similar to what's been happening in South Asia overall. And while there have been opportunities, we've also seen serious risk around the kind of technologies being adopted, but also the kind of regulation being adopted and the harms that are being impacting marginalized communities in the region. I'll particularly set some context into what's happening in Pakistan and then move towards platform accountability. But in Pakistan, we've been seeing a surge around gender disinformation and technology facilitated gender-based violence, particularly targeting marginalized communities and women and gender minorities. And this was very prevalent even during the recent May conflicts of India and Pakistan, which is very interesting to hear. But actually, Digital Rights Foundation came up with a report around how misogynist, sexist, and gendered narratives were weaponized online, and they were shared from across the borders and being mimicked by both sides of the border, which were creating a lot of hateful content on platforms and amplifying digital hate. And this has been very common. Now, Pakistan sees a lot of cross-border digital hate, and so does, I'm sure, our neighbors. But now there's always been I would say, pattern around dangerous real world consequences for women and gender minorities in the country. Recently, a minor 17-year-old TikTok star, Sana Yusuf, was killed by her follower for repeatedly refusing her advances. And that led to a string of, I would say, hate and violence against the minor, and a lot of people sexualizing the victim, and also misogynistic slurs, disinformation, and blaming blaming the victim and promoting hateful narratives. And this was the report that DRF came out with. What was interesting to see was that Sana's case, which was the TikToker that was killed, and even the recent May escalations that led to gender-based violence and technology facilitated gender-based violence being promoted on platforms reflects overall how women occupy digital spaces in South Asia and how they are met with online abuse that not only threatens their safety but also excuses the violence that has happened against them. Digital Rights Foundation has also a running digital security helpline, and over the past 8 years, we've observed that online cases against online cases of women being threatened, blackmailed, and even their personal informational non-consensual use of sharing intimate images, personal information being used against them has increased and surged a lot. And artificial intelligence and deepfakes and generated AI is adding to this problem. And the shame and discredit that prominent women and women overall face has been huge, and it reinforces patriarchal violence in the region. And this is very interesting aspect to see, because despite urgently holding platforms accountable in a time when viral information is leading to offline consequences, we've seen that little has been done in this space. Similarly, we've seen that information controls and censorship and shutdowns have been prevalent in the region. The Pakistani government has been in the face of a digital turmoil because we are now focusing entirely on a digital transformation from technology and infrastructure to also regulation. So even during the recent conflicts, and I keep on bringing up the conflicts because it set up serious precedents in South Asia for Pakistan and other neighboring countries as well, that we saw that through a report that we did with Open Observatory of Network Interference, ONI, that there was geo-blocking of content, and major news outlets from both sides of the border, 12 from India, 8 from Pakistan, were blocked. Now, this sets a very, I would say, dangerous precedent in the history of South Asia politics, because it's cutting public access to information. It's platform level censorship that is escalated on both ends of the border, and these actions are apparently for national security, hate speech, fake news, but they lack transparency and due process. And even there are a lot of questions being raised around platform enforcement in crisis during this time. Pakistan is no I would say Pakistan has a history of internet outages and shutdowns. Over the year in 2024 alone, 16 shutdowns took place, and 10 of those blackouts were in a very sensitive time of the country when political turmoil was at its peak. But it caused there was a lot of human impact to this. There were disruptions around education, healthcare, livelihoods, and even recently, internet shutdowns we've seen also impacts aid resources in a country that is already facing a climate crisis right now. So, and what's more interesting to see is that the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, which is the, you would say, National Cybercrime Act of Pakistan, was passed and amended in 2025, and it gave broad powers to monitor and regulate online content. And this over compliance of platforms with enforcement authorities has also been a lot very problematic, because it has led to certain narratives being promoted on platforms, and also which can be problematic, but also fueled disinformation and curbed freedom of expression online. And these sweeping provisions pose a threat to free speech overall, and silence dissent, political opposition, and minority point of view on in the country. Another thing that I want to highlight is how surveillance technologies are being expanding in the region, and how shrinking civic space has been also been seen. In a recent report, I'm sure everybody's also seen that in September, it came out last week. Amnesty International reported that Pakistan has now a comprehensive surveillance system that includes lawful intercept management system and web monitoring system. Now, these systems enable a lot of agencies to tap into 4 million mobile phones simultaneously, but also filtering 2 million internet sessions altogether. and the dual capacity of these systems that the authorities have to monitor private calls and websites is extremely problematic because it is having implications for marginalized groups, particularly activists, human rights defenders, and journalists who are increasingly being monitored, doxxed, or targeted due to harassment, and their private data is being intercepted. And we're witnessing in like institutionalization, I would say, of this sort of surveillance equipment without transparency or oversight or legal safeguards, an indirect violation of the fundamental rights in the constitution that the citizens of the country are guaranteed, but also under the ICCPR and other human rights treaties. And from a policy perspective also, it's creating an environment that is, of course, very, I would say, it's creating an environment that is very erodes democratic process and that questions the due diligence process that is there. Another thing that I want to highlight
Sorry,
because
Seerat. I think I'm really sorry to interrupt. I think time is up. If you could wrap up in like 30 seconds, we can
yeah,
come back. Yeah, thank
I
you. Sure,
just put my last point and
sure,
then
sure, sure.
wrap
Thank
up.
you.
So I just wanted to touch briefly on the digital ID and data protection concerns in Pakistan because we are also moving towards an e-governance structure, which is the digital public infrastructure and the digital ID program through the computerized national identity card and NADRA. And we've seen that the World Bank and all of these, the Asian Development Bank are highly invested in this. But this has also been a recent problem considering that Pakistan does not have a data protection bill, and also because it impacts disproportionately women, transgender people, and marginalized groups, particularly when they don't have ID cards. And we're also seeing this in the current climate crisis right now because people who don't have ID cards, the impact of them receiving aid during the current floods has also been a problem. So digitizing these efforts are impacting the marginalized communities, and this is something that we need to overall see with a multi-stakeholder model where civil societies also come in and local grassroots organizations also come in and then talk about how these issues are impacting real lives of people. So I'll just stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Seerat. And I think you touched upon so many things. And I think one of the things that stood out is the fact that this online spaces, is it just another opportunity for women to experience and other marginalized genders to experience subjugation in another way? Like, is it just an added avenue to continue the marginalization of women and other vulnerable genders? And what can be done to prevent that or address that? And you also highlighted how within the context of surveillance and shrinking civic space, this selective content moderation that happens through platforms, how dangerous that can be and the consequences of that. So thank you for highlighting the perspective of Pakistan. I will now we've heard from Nepal, we've heard from Pakistan, now we get to hear Sri Lanka's perspective. And for that, I will hand it over to Dulanjaya Mahagamage, who's the researcher and digital rights advocate at #Generation Sri Lanka. So Dulanjaya, can you flag some of the challenges that you're facing with the digital transformation in agenda in Sri Lanka and the role that you think platforms play in ensuring accountability? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pratana. Really glad to be here. So, digital transformation is not a new term for Sri Lanka. We observe the big investment in infrastructure and also the platforms in Sri Lanka, especially after the civil war, especially internet facilities and the policies were introduced. And also, we have a digitalizing system for the government as well, introduced after the civil war. We observe those things, but we have questioned whether these facilities are uh, have benefit for the especially for the rural and also the marginalized communities. And also Sri Lanka is a developing country and introducing digital transformation and also with steps in every year. So we observe a new element in every year. But in last year, we observe a new step which are introduced by the government. So as other countries in South Asia, Sri Lanka introduced the Online Safety Act last year, effective from February last year. So while it presented as a way to protect citizens, especially children and women, but CSOs and other activists actually risk that it decriminalizing the dissent. And also it gives broader power to the state to silence activists and also journalists and also even ordinary citizens. So online safety act in Sri Lanka have key provisions such as online safety commission. The act create a five-member commission appointed by the president, and also prohibition of the prohibited statement. So this Online Safety Act has ability to criminalize a communication of prohibited statement, which has a really question about what this prohibited statements means, and also regulation of online platforms, which similar to incidents in Nepal and other countries, and also that mention about combating online content and also content about like combating misuse of online account, especially during elections. And also, this act is one element which introduced last year. But we in hashtag generation as an organization who concerned about online hate speech and other harmful speech, especially during election period. In hashtag generation, we observe election from 2019. So every presidential, parliamentary, and also local government election. There in our monitoring, we found that a lot of like ethno-nationalistic hate speech and also gender harassment systematically targeting politicians and also the female candidates to manipulate voter behavior. And also these speeches were weaponized of digital platforms and undermine democracy and polarizing communities, especially during the local government election and also the parliamentary election. With there being more female candidates, we also a lot of like gender related hate speech and TFGBV targeting them in both Sinhala and Tamil languages. And also the Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, those are the major platforms, social media platforms in Sri Lanka. So, but we observe that in our day-to-day social media monitoring exercise, we observe that the Sinhala and Tamil, which are the major language in Sri Lanka, the content moderation related to languages are remain low resources. So we observe that harmful contents with misogynistic slurs and also coded language, and especially the meme and AI-generated content are not taken down by the platforms, especially targeting LGBT community and other marginalized communities. So I think this is a good moment for governments and also the platform to collaborate and also invest in local language expertise in their and also the local language knowledge in their content moderation process. And this information we observe, especially during election and also after the election narratives around land rights and also the environmental disputes and also transitional justice manipulated online, not as like not from the ordinary citizen, ordinary social media users, but those are like coordinated effort to targeting minorities. And for the example, the false claim regarding the mass graves, especially regarding Germany mass grave were spread. In northern and eastern provinces, and also there were a lot of disinformation targeting the 13 amendment, which is give land and police power, which has some provision to give land and police power to other eastern provinces. So those are the well coordinated disinformation campaigns, but we also lack of content moderation regarding them. In Sri Lanka, we have only like few fact checking organization, so that's really challenging at the moment. And those are, and also we during the election we observe that disinformation linked with geopolitical interest. There is India, China, Russia, or other Western countries, shape debating land use and also the development and also the sovereignty, especially regarding the global crisis. And we observe that the content related to the international conflict, for the example, Gaza conflict, we observe that those content are coming to Sri Lankan algorithms and for Islamophobia in Sri Lankan context. That's really challenging because some of these contents are in English, but those are appearing in our Sri Lankan algorithms, which is create Islamophobia in our local context. And also the Online Safety Act they try to give some solution for the women and children with regard to gender harm, but that's not addressing technology-based gender-based violence directly. And also, we observe that after January, after the policy changes by social media platform, we observe a clear increase of the gender harms in online, especially in Facebook and TikTok platforms. And also in elections, we observe that the paid ads are really challenging, and those are the main challenges we observe in digital transformation in Sri Lanka. But those are not just concerns, but the facts that we need to address. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dhananjay. I think despite the country context being slightly different, it's very obvious that there are certain commonalities that go across countries, and how the disinformation campaigns that you highlighted, Dhananjay, is leading to Islamophobia, targeting of minorities, around land issues, environmental issues, how all of that creates an ecosystem where the false narratives can have far-reaching implications on the rights of communities. And I think now is the opportunity to step back a little bit. We've had the country-specific contexts, and now it would be good to understand what are some of the principles that we need to look at to ensure that we actually move in the right direction. So I'll pass it on now to Lorenzo Urbinati, who is the Rights in Digital Space and Data Justice Strategic Advisor at Oxfam International Asia. So Lorenzo, looking at the 3 country contexts that were highlighted, what do you think are some of the basic principles that need to underpin the digital transformation agenda?
Thank you, Prarthan. Hello, everyone. And thanks to our friends online. I think a lot of the digital transformation discourse is usually around access. Luckily, sometimes we connect access with equity, but oftentimes it's about connectivity and how do we access technology. So I thought it would be important to start with what in Oxfam, but not only, we call the 6 A's of access. They're self-explanatory, but happy to highlight a few of them. The first one is availability. Of course, technology has to be available. Affordability, and you will hear private sector talk about affordability quite a bit. Awareness, and here it becomes a bit more subtle. Accessibility, and we heard, for example, internet shutdowns in Pakistan. Ability, and digital literacy, media literacy is supposed to tackle the ability one. But there is also architecture. I would like to emphasize the architecture one. This means the right of people, professionals, communities of diverse background to actually actively engage and participate in the design and the creation of the digital spaces. When we talk about online platforms, when we talk about digital tools, who are actually the users and for what purpose these tools have been designed? So considering that the impact is on the people should also have a say on the design and on the architecture. In this sense, I think it's important to add a few more principles. The first one is that the access to technology absolutely has to be unconditional, absolutely has to be safe, and we heard the experiences about, again, social media platforms, especially when it comes to gender-based violence, which is tech facilitated. It has to be meaningful, it has to be affordable, but it also has to be voluntary. And I think the voluntary is not emphasized enough. I'll give an example, which is concerning ASEAN. For an upcoming paper, together with Forum Asia, but also Access Now, Engage Media, and Wikimedia Foundation, we are analyzing ASEAN policy frameworks related to digitalization. Now, we were quite disappointed to see that there is absolutely no mention of the right to opt out. So the concept seems to be that digitalization processes are inherently positive. They will lead to some positive outcomes, and we're going to all benefit from digitalization. But this is not always the case. The same people then that are supposed to automatically benefit from digitalization processes, for example, in ASEAN, they are completely left in the dark and not part of key processes such as the ASEAN Digital Economic Framework Agreement. So how can we expect to have a DEFA, a Digital Economic Framework Agreement, that is in the interest of people if people are not part of these processes? For this, I think another message that I would like to highlight is the one that digital technologies need to be appropriate and proportional to communities' needs. The access to technologies should not substitute, first and foremost, necessary investments in other essential public services. And we heard the experience of Pakistan with the national IDs, for example. Services that might still be offline, it doesn't mean that they don't need to function anymore because we have online versions. So if you have partially or fully digitalized services, there has to be provisions for affected members of society so that they can access them and use them in a way that is safe, in a way that is secure, in a way that is equitable. And again, also people should have a say in the systems and how these online digital services are designed. Again, the national ID example, I think from CIRAT is a very relevant one. Finally, based on what we heard so far, I think it's also important to emphasize another basic principle, which is the one of the public good nature of technology, including the internet. At Oxfam, we see the internet as an essential public good. It is not just a resource to be exploited. It can be exploited for the extraction of wealth. It can be exploited for the interest of private sector. Ultimately, it's important that these technologies, as well as all the innovations that originate from them, such as artificial intelligence, they remain accountable to the public, and they actually remain for the interest of the public. For this, of course, you need transparency. You need participatory and inclusive processes. For example, when we talk about inclusivity, which is something that we see quite often mentioned in digital frameworks and policies, we cannot talk about inclusivity just from the point of view of adoption. The fact that people adopt a technology doesn't mean that this becomes inclusive, because there are socioeconomic, societal barriers that are faced by vulnerable groups and communities that need to be taken into account when we talk about adoption, and oftentimes they're not. So bottom line is that in order to do this, to ensure that we have inclusive policies, we need to have people and communities who are the rights holders, because it's also important to emphasize that although we are living a so-called unprecedented revolutionary digital era, where everything seems to be making history and change the humankind, we still have human rights frameworks, we still have human rights norms and standards. So this means that people are still rights holders. This means that human beings still have agency, and we need to preserve the agency, especially in the era of AI, and people still have a say. At the same time, we also need to make sure that authorities, regulators, policymakers don't fall into the trap, and I can also add civil society if you want, the trap of techno-solutionism, or thinking that technology is going to fix everything for us and present it on a silver plate, as well as corporate capture. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's so many principles that you highlighted in less than 5 minutes. I was taking notes frantically, but I think the 6 A's that you mentioned, and I think one thing that stood out was the right to opt out, because I think most of us work on the assumption that we all want to be part of this digital sphere, which is a bit presumptuous. So I think the ability to opt out and how that's a form of inclusivity as well was something that really stood out for me. So thank you for highlighting the principles that need to be the foundation of the digital transformation that we hope to do inclusively in the region. Moving on from the principles to the specific implications of this transformation on the financial sector. For the last speaker, I will pass it on to Kyle Cruz, who's the influencing and campaigning manager at Fair Finance Asia. Kyle, what do you see as the role of financial institutions in leveraging their role in advancing human rights due diligence in this digital transformation agenda in the financial sector in Asia? Over to you.
Thanks for the question, Prart, and also to all the insightful interventions of the other speakers. So first, I'll start off with an introduction of FFA. So for those of you who aren't so familiar yet, Fair Finance Asia, we're an Oxfam regional initiative, a network of over 90 CSOs working together to ensure that the funding decisions of financial institutions in the region uphold the rights and well-being of local communities and the environment. So FFA is operational at the regional level and across 10 CSO country coalitions in Asia. The network leverages a robust methodology called Fair Finance Guide International, or FFGI, to critically assess gaps in the policies and practices of a range of financial institutions. That includes MDBs, IFIs, commercial banks, insurers, pension funds, investors, asset managers, so on and so forth. And so FFA, we use this research to call on financial institutions, regulators, policymakers, and private sector companies to redirect more finance toward more sustainable investments and outcomes across a range of themes: climate change, energy, gender equality, human rights, labor rights, transparency and accountability, to name a few. So some of you may be wondering why FFA is on a panel of CSOs addressing digital rights. So the main reason is because the FFA network believes that financial institutions are key actors, so central actors, in Asia's digital transformation. They're not on the periphery or in the background, but they're sitting on the driver's seat, influencing what digital projects receive capital and technical assistance. As a result, alongside more visible actors that the other panelists talked about, such as digital platforms and tech companies, financial institutions should also be held accountable for the negative impacts of their digital investments, particularly on affected local communities, marginalized groups, human rights defenders, and for ensuring meaningful, transparent, and timely consultations. So FFA also believes that financial institutions should leverage their lending and investment power to require clients, borrowers, and investees involved in digital value chains to strengthen their rights-based approaches and due diligence. And just to give you a snapshot of the significant involvement of financial institutions in the region. So at the Asia-Pacific level, the International Data Corporation reported that in 2024, Asia-Pacific banks reached USD 30.4 billion in digital transformation spending. This is expected to grow to 48.6 billion by 2027 in the areas of software, data, and analytics. Specifically in Southeast Asia, the world more than $30 billion was committed to building AI-ready data centers in Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia, and just a special emphasis on multilateral development banks and IFIs like ADB. So in 2024, ADB committed $6.2 billion to Southeast Asia toward accelerating digital technologies, fintech, and capacity building for MSMEs. And the IFC in 2025 launched investments in Nepal in the areas of broadband infrastructure and data services. And just a note about ADB, so for some of us, we were at the annual meeting of the ADB back in May. And even a few months before that, we learned that the ADB had just launched their digital sector office. So that was a signal that one of the most important, if not the most important MDB in the region is pivoting significantly towards digital investments. So amidst this growth of digital investments, how can CSOs support Asia's financial sector actors to strengthen rights-based approaches and due diligence? So number one, leveraging robust benchmarking methodologies that we already have, like I mentioned, the Fair Finance Guide International, to assess gaps in the policies and practices of FIs relevant for the digital sector. For example, an obvious question is, do these financial institutions, like a commercial bank at the national level, do they even have a digital sector policy? Yeah. Number two, using this research to engage in evidence-based advocacy. So for MDBs, IFIs, and other financial institutions, strengthen rights-based considerations and due diligence in their digital investment strategies. Also, the financing modalities that will come out of those strategies, as well as interrelated policies. So for example, safeguards and accountability mechanisms. It's also important, I think it was mentioned by maybe Lorenzo, it's important to have the option for divesting from digital projects linked to serious rights violations, or those that jeopardize climate and just transition commitments, because as we know, a lot of these new technologies are quite resource intensive, or those that funnel critical funding away from essential non-digital public services. Financial institutions should also enhance democratic access to digital spaces. So for example, in the case of Nepal, they closed it, while publicly supporting and openly supporting the openness of civic space in Asia. And then for regulators and policymakers, we can urge them, so at the regional and national level, for example, bodies like ASEAN and central banks, to create an enabling regulatory environment that requires financial institutions to align with the highest international standards in digital financing, including by addressing the environmental and social impacts of cross-border financing and digital supply chains. So because a lot of the financial institutions, they're providing financing from one country to the other, or MDBs coordinating funds down to financial intermediaries. Regulators and policymakers should also enhance transparency and accountability by expanding environmental and social considerations specific for digital investments in mandatory and voluntary disclosure frameworks. So, for example, in taxonomies for sustainable finance. Digital impacts, for example, are on the radar for the ASEAN taxonomy, technical screening criteria, but there is a lot of room to expand those considerations. CSO should also build the capacity of ourselves and our partners to engage in effective evidence-based advocacy at the nexus of sustainable finance and digital rights. So both are very technical areas, and it's important to keep building our knowledge and skills base. Lastly, it's important for CSOs to raise a lot of public awareness so that consumers and voters, particularly in the next generation, really understand the impact of digital investments in their lives and how they can hold their banks accountable and apply additional pressure. So just to close, the digital transformation is this new and rapidly evolving red thread, already affecting all sectors and themes, and I think everybody in this room. So advocating for stronger rights-based approaches and due diligence in this transformation, it doesn't require reinventing the wheel. So as civil society, we can build upon and strengthen our intersectional approach and find where digital rights already complements existing advocacies towards Asia's financial sector. For example, climate, just energy transition, gender, business and human rights, and stakeholder engagement. So this intersectional approach is also relevant for financial institutions, governments, and other stakeholders to ensure that the strategies they develop to the digital transformation are not siloed, but well coordinated. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And can we have a big round of applause for all the panelists, please? I think that was the perfect close because you mentioned, I mean, with the kind of money going in the digital transformation agenda and the financial institutions and the role that they play, I think you reminded us that it all comes back. It's all operating within this ecosystem of international human rights standards and norms. And that's something that we cannot forget. These don't operate outside the system. They're just one cog in a much larger system, and we have to hold them accountable as much as we can. So with that, we have 10 minutes for questions and interventions in the interest of taking as many diverse voices as possible. If you can keep your question targeted or your intervention within 30 seconds, that would be really, really great. I'm also monitoring the online Q&A. There aren't any questions as of now, but if any of the online audiences want to add questions as well, please do. With a show of hands, can we see if anyone has questions, thoughts, interventions? Okay, I see one here. Maybe we can take 2-3 questions at a time, but yeah, go ahead, please.
Hello. I'm James. I'm from Rapid Asia Social Research Consultancy. So we can see that digital technology, specifically social media, is increasingly being used as a tool to censor and manipulate information for political gain. So to what extent can Asian countries protect their citizens from misinformation without compromising free speech principles? Thank you.
Thank you, James. Anyone else? Okay, maybe we can start with that. Was that question for anyone in particular or in all the panelists?
Anyone who feels strongly about that.
Sure. I will hand it over to any of the panelists if you'd like to take that. No one online yet. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a very tricky question, and I think this has been discussed over and over. I think a good starting point is the fact, as also mentioned by Kyle, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We do have human rights principles and standards, international human rights law. We have conventions, especially for states that are parties of this convention. We know there are limitations to freedom of expression, but those limitations are very carefully, if you want, to be adopted, and there has to be the principle of proportionality, of necessity. So also when it comes to social media platforms, these things do not disappear. We've been recently talking with a few of them, and they are very much aware of it. You can also check the human rights reports. They do try to adhere to these standards in theory. Then we need to see what is the practice. So I think in this sense, a clear message was the need to receive from civil society, from communities, from defenders, from users, as many information and as many cases as possible. I think the number of cases that are brought to their attention can make a difference, and the same thing can be done towards authorities. I think the discussion around misinformation, disinformation can also be easily utilized to actually crack down on fundamental freedoms. So it's a very risky one. We have seen a lot of internet shutdowns in the region, and not only being justified by there is too much misinformation, disinformation, let's have an internet shutdown. That one is not proportional, is not necessary neither, in my opinion. So it's a tricky one, but I would say document cases, remain within the standards and principle and norms, and try to have the stakeholders, especially the users and communities and defenders, part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Santosh, I see you unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Prathana. So I think this is not a responsibility of a particular stakeholder. I think we all are into it, and be it social media company or government or civil society organization, media. As Lorenzo said, that one of the issue they might say that we do not have the enough information, but at the same time, we have to also see whether the community guideline they have adopted is country specific, context specific or not, whether they have the capacity, ability to moderate content, offensive or problematic content or not. Through the recent example, based on the recent example, they, in my opinion, they completely failed to remove or constrain or prevent provocative or problematic content from Nepal. And they have to now, I think we have to have an open conversation with social media companies, how they, what was their observation, what was their reflection, how did they address the situation, or what was their challenges. One of the issues we saw in the case of Nepal, the government, there was a kind of tug of war between the social media companies and the government trying to regulate them, and in the name of regulation, control them, and social media company even not having the discussion or consultation with the government in open manner, civil society organization trying to connect with the social media companies, and social media platform not reaching out to the local communities. So I think these stakeholders somehow were acting on their own, and they were not having the open dialogue. So I think for the regulation or the protecting speech and restricting problematic content, I think there has to be a trustful environment, and that is missing. I see that is missing. So I think open dialogue and open consultation and trust among the stakeholders is also the minimum requirement at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Santosh. Before I give it to Seerath, I think Seerath has something to add as well. Can I see a show of hands of anyone else interested to ask? I see one. Okay, perfect. So I'll pass it on to Seerath, and then we can have the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Prarthana. I'll just keep it very short and echo what Santosh and Lorenzo have said. There are the GNI principles as well that talk about how platforms should be looking at disinformation and what they should be doing, and looking at it from a legality, necessity, and proportionality perspective. But I also just want to point out that a lot of the escalations around disinformation and harmful content is done by civil society organizations and trusted partners. And social media platforms now have a responsibility to listen to their trusted partners, not just as stakeholders who are doing the legwork for them in terms of escalating context, but also understanding the region that they're working in, like Santosh said, and understanding that that in Asia, it's not one size fits all. It's a very different environment, and there are very different cultures, customs, and a lot happening here. The politics is also very different. So listening to people who are actually escalating that content and having more civil society actors in the room, and human rights defenders who can give that context, even in terms of making a new legislation around disinformation, if there needs to be one, because we also know the repercussions of having those, and then having press freedom issues and free speech issues, but also in terms of escalating that content. Because right now we work as trusted partners, but we've seen civil society does a lot of legwork for the platforms. And I think that's something that needs to change. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very important point, that civil society has to be seen as like an equal stakeholder and not just someone who does all the legwork and then is ignored conveniently whenever it suits the platform. So thank you for flagging that. Last question, in the interest of time, over to you.
Hi, my name is Ananya. Hi, my name is Ananya. I'm a lawyer and policy researcher from India. My question is for Kyle. So when you talk about like digital rights, and having these conversations with asset owners and managers, how do you even get them to talk about like rights, right? They're motivated by fiduciary duties and driving shareholder value. So how do you broach that conversation with them? And what are the levers that you see in the Asian region to have these sort of conversations? I mean, in EU, you have laws, you have CSDDD and CSRD that are pushing financial institutions to do this work, right? And you've seen similar ESG backlash in US. So what are the levers within this particular region that you think actually work?
I think one lever that the FFA network has seen is inspiring a race to the top. So when we conduct our policy assessments, particularly at the national level, so we have CSO coalitions in 10 countries across Asia. They've seen that every year they assess a set of banks. The banks over time feel they start to want to compete with each other and it works out for them because then they're able to share to the public that they're performing well on better than their competitors in a friendly manner. So that's one way through the bank policy assessments. In terms of encouraging MDBs and IFIs to align with human rights standards for them, it's often a reputational risk. So CSOs are quite adamant about monitoring the activities of MDBs and how they shape their policies. I would say that our approach is to continue urging them to strengthen their human rights approaches and environmental rights approaches. But the gap is in their policies related to their clients and borrowers. So for example, the ADB may be strong on expecting itself to align with the Paris Agreement and international standards, but in the language that they shape for their safeguards framework, for example, the ESF, which is set to be operationalized next year, it's still very vague. They won't explicitly say that they require their clients and borrowers in the public sector, but also financial intermediaries to align. So yeah, there's opportunities, but also gaps. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, unfortunately, that brings us right to the end of our time slot. We also want to make sure we're respecting the next session that's happening in the room. So yeah, I just wanted to thank the panelists, thank the participants, everyone for attending. We know this is sometimes a new topic to explore, but we'd be more than happy to also have informal conversations with you outside this session if this is something that you would like to discuss with the panelists today. So thank you.